Hello!
Hey everyone.
Welcome back to another Friday.
With Josh and Eliza.
We're here to answer all your questions about accent learning that you've always wanted to know but perhaps been nervous to ask. And today we're going to be speaking about idioms. Some of our favorites, some of the most common ones you may encounter. We'll discuss what an idiom is, what makes it an idiom, and what makes it not slang.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or something else.
Something else, yeah.
I feel like I need to acknowledge the fact that I've never taken this in before, but you and I have crown molding game on point.
I know. It just is my favorite thing. It really is.
Gosh,
Truly.
we're so...
Classic,
just
truly.
Classic.
I know.
And speaking of classic, we've compiled a list of our top 10. And so we're going to take you through that list right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the first idiom on our list is raining cats and dogs.
Which is one of my suggestions. This is one of my personal favorites. And so if it's raining a lot outside, you could just say it's raining a lot, but why? When you could say instead, wow, it's really raining cats and dogs out there.
And I really love and appreciate this idiom. And I think we all sort of have I was speaking about idioms a little bit earlier, and I was talking about the fact that context is everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we memorize really quickly in context. We learn a lot based on the context of the language. And so when I hear raining cats and dogs, I sort of hear the voice of a person who would use this. Now I'll hear your voice.
Great. Good.
But up until now, it was always a person who had a little sense of whimsy
Mm-hmm.
and was trying to make light of something very intense, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sort of it's like a delightfully whimsical metaphor when there's something just intense and possibly, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a problem in your day. It's like, ugh.
Mm-hmm.
So instead you use this like beautiful image.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my favorite, especially if it's like a really large thunderstorm, right? Because of the added sounds of the thunder and the wind, right?
I've never considered that before, but yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, now I will hear your voice in my head.
Perfect.
And perhaps use raining cats and dogs more often.
Perfect.
Our next idiom on the list is bit off more than you can chew.
Yes. I am guilty of biting off more than I can chew often. Often.
Yes. Perhaps with each of these idioms that we mentioned, we might also talk about like a useful, we'll talk more about context that we use them in, and then
Mm-hmm.
we'll fill in that sort of context void that so often happens when you're learning a new language, predominantly from a curriculum, and not just absorbing it from speakers.
Mm-hmm.
So let's fill that context void. Bit off more than you can chew. For me, this lives in it lives in responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've bitten it off, then you're responsible for chewing it. But I always like it because it lives in the same place as like I have to function in the same way that I do when I eat.
Mm-hmm.
So I've bitten off more than I can chew. I've got to function more
Yes.
to sort of deal with that.
Yes. Or you've got to acknowledge it and outsource it. So I sometimes think about this in like a home improvement aspect. Like, yes, I'm going to take down this wall and create an open concept. But you didn't realize it was weight bearing and something collapsed, right? So you bit off more than you could chew with the home improvement project. And so now you need to admit it and outsource and hire an expert to help facilitate. That's maybe an extreme example, but like in a smaller day-to-day, for example, at my main job, sometimes students will ask me to come and watch rehearsals and offer feedback and meet one-on-one. And I have a tendency to just say yes to everything. And then sometimes I accidentally double or triple book on the same day because I've agreed to things with student projects. And so I bit off a little more than I could chew. And then I have to rearrange my schedule. I have to go back. To use another idiom, I have to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate so that I can actually chew.
That's a very good, and I like that. It's also you've hit on something, which is that this might be true in all languages, but I know that it's true in my experience of English. But idioms often come into play when the speaker is discussing something that has a degree of discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to use literal language is somehow uncomfortable, either socially or emotionally,
mm-hmm.
Personally.
Mm-hmm.
So we use idiom as a method of distancing, of discussing something that is sensitive or uncomfortable, but with a degree of distance.
Yeah. I don't want to say to you, I did this very wrong, or I made a mistake. I want to say, I bit off a little more than I could chew.
Absolutely.
I need some help chewing. Right?
I'll help you chew anytime, Josh.
Excellent.
Our next idiom is a theater idiom.
Yes, my favorite.
Break a leg.
Break a leg. Break a leg, Eliza.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes, I love this idiom. It was has its origins in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know the exact origins of it, but the story that I was told is that you say the worst thing that can happen so that it won't happen.
Mm.
And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Were you done with your story? Yeah.
Oh, no. That break a leg comes from the concept that if you're a performer and you're about to go on stage, the worst thing that could possibly happen to you as someone who makes their living by performing is that you break a leg because you can't perform, you can't do the show, but also you're, crippled from your enterprise. So rather than say something encouraging, you say the worst possible thing so that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Sort of canceling it out.
I was told two specific things about this. I like your version too, but I was told two things. The first one is that if you say "have a good show," that's a faux pas, right? Like have a good show, because in live performance, each night is maybe a little different. You can't predict because it's a live event, and so maybe somebody drops a prop one night that they didn't the night before, or maybe somebody messes a lineup slightly. So you don't want to say that because you don't want to get people in their head. So instead you say break a leg. And then the other thing I was taught about it was that there's a history in vaudeville of theaters booking a lot of acts, more acts than perhaps would go on in a night. And so the legs of the curtains on the sides are sometimes called the legs. And so I hope you break a leg was a wish from one vaudeville act to another that they would get paid to go on, because they might have been booked, but if they didn't actually go on stage and perform, they wouldn't get money. So break a leg was a wish that you would get to perform your act and get paid. And so it's a beautiful thing. And now it's kind of used like interview situations. Like my sister just graduated from nursing school, and before her final exams, I said, break a leg on your exams. Right. So it's like it's a wish for success.
Oh, I love that. Yes, it can be used in almost any kind of performative setting. I like it because it always sort of, again, injects a little bit of whimsy into any moment. And a little bit of like, word I'm looking for is like satire or like snark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Good. I love that vaudevillian origin. For some reason, that like grounding it in commerce makes it so much. I'm like, that's it. That's got to be it. That's got to.
Right.
Yes, it's about getting.
I don't know if that has any truth at all, but it like somehow tickles me a little bit.
It feels right. We'll do some deeper diving and research. Our next idiom is one that Josh mentioned earlier. Go back to the drawing board.
Go back to the drawing board.
I think that you can use this in any scenario where you've gone a couple steps into a plan and all signs are telling you that your design is flawed and will not achieve your goal. And so you actually have to go back to the beginning step, the creation of the plan. And the drawing board is essentially like a chalkboard or a whiteboard or a bulletin board, whatever you use to plan out the idea and the plan visually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a like a kind of a reset, right, component to this one. Mm-hmm. Before you get so far that resetting is actually detrimental, right? It's kind of like catching something before it gets so far that you actually have an issue going back to the beginning, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
What does that sound?
It's the bird who is very grumpy.
You have a bird?
Yes.
What kind of bird?
He's a pineapple green-cheeked conure. I can put him in the bedroom. Just 1 second.
The next idiom that we're going to tackle is get your act together.
I use this one all the time, mostly in my like self-talk to myself, sometimes to other people, but if you're using it with another person, if it's depending on the context, it can be received a little harshly. So I tend to use it mostly with myself, right? So go on a journey with me and imagine that I've woken up like 10 minutes late and I'm rushing around, and as I'm making my coffee, it spills everywhere and I have to clean it up. And then I'm rushing around and I like get myself out to my car, and I get in my car and I realized I've left my wallet and my phone inside on the table. So I have to go back inside and get them, right? And on my way back inside to get my phone and my wallet, I say to myself, come on, Josh, get your act together. Get your act together today, right? And it's meaning, right? See if we can be a little more organized, see if we can be a little bit more like put together, see if we can be a little bit more on time, right? See if we can be a little bit more efficient. I also use it like if I've forgotten something really important, to like, for example, to file my taxes and I filed them a week late. Oh no, I really need to get my act together, right? Because there are like dates and deadlines for these things that I could like put in my calendar and notify myself ahead of time, for example, right? So I got to get my act together.
And I do love that, because I actually encountered somebody who was learning English and they said they always assumed that it was like act correctly. Like I need to get my act together so that I can act correctly, that I can take correct action. And I love that sort of breakdown of it. But I think it also, this is another one that comes from theater, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. So we got 2 in the list.
Yeah,
at least 2 in the list. Yeah.
Amazing how much comes from theater. So our next idiom, I love that one, by the way. And I'll also offer, for context, act, like Josh said, can be strict, right? Mm-hmm. So if you use it on someone else, it can be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
But if you want to be aggressive, There are words other than act that you can substitute.
Yeah. You could even just say, like, you need to get yourself together.
Get yourself together.
Right. Yeah.
Get your SHIT together.
Together, right?
Yeah.
That's often a substitution.
And then that's hyper aggressive. Right.
Yeah. That's often received not well. Yeah.
Great. So our next idiom is wrap my head around it.
Just the image of this is delicious to me, right? So I think idioms are amazing because we use language to represent a feeling or a concept or a situation that on its own inspires like a completely different image. So like, I can't wrap my mind around this. I can't wrap my head around this. So I literally can't like understand it and process it in my brain. But just the image of like trying to like unfold and twist my head around something is delightful and grotesque and hilarious. All in like one. It's like a Dali painting.
Agreed.
Like, where like the clocks are melting. Like, yeah. So I kind of offered my way of understanding this. It's being unable to process fully a piece of information or not being able to understand it completely. Like there's some connection to it, but like it's going to take more time to fully understand, or you're going to need someone to explain it to you again, or right there's like another step that's going to have to be taken for you to fully digest what's just been offered to you.
Absolutely. And like most of these idioms, I think that it's important to drop in that there's usually a level of discomfort with the lack of understanding. So either you feel a little bit uncomfortable and embarrassed. And so, I can't wrap my head around this grammar concept is an acceptable thing. It's because you're just giving yourself a little distance from that feeling.
Yeah.
But also, if it's something that you are having trouble accepting, I just can't wrap my head around, my ex's new relationship, or just can't wrap my head around, this new living situation. Maybe you don't like the way that things are, and you can't get used to it.
It could also be work related if there's news being offered to you from somebody who has like power over you. So like a boss or a higher up in your organization, if there's a meeting and they present information to you that's like not pleasant and you want to try to clarify or challenge, often a way that is done is by saying, excuse me, manager, boss, CEO, whatever, I'm having some difficulty wrapping my mind around what you've just offered, and I'm wondering if you could clarify why this is being done, right?
Yes.
That's often a way to kind of soften that, like, I don't agree with what's happening, like thing, especially if it's somebody who's higher up in a company.
That's a really good point. That's a great example. Our next idiom is let's call it a day.
I feel like out of all of them, this one feels like the most like soccer parent, like dad, like dad or like soccer mom to me. Like this one feels just like, let's call it a day. It's like, I don't know why. I don't know what it is about it, but it feels very like parent to me.
Well, I agree. And you and I were speaking a little earlier about the fact that idioms very often feel antique, or they feel like the generation that came before us, mainly because we tend to inherit idioms. Whereas if we gain new language from our peers, then it's slang.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we like kind of delineate that. Right? Because then when you and your peer group get to a certain age and you keep using your slang, your children start to pick it up, or your nieces or your nephews. And then for them, it's an idiomatic expression. and they develop new slang, right? So now we have like Gen Z, for example, because I'm in my late 30s, and I shouldn't do that to myself. I'm in my mid 30s still. My birthday's in a couple weeks.
Prime. You're in your prime.
We're entering late 30s. I'm in my prime. Let's call it a day on that conversation about my age. So I just demonstrated for you one of the ways that you could use it. So it's like meant to wrap something up, right?
Right.
It's meant to signify the end of a thing. I often use this actually in coaching contexts. I'll say, okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. So let's do this exercise and then we'll wrap up together and call it a day.
Mm-hmm. Call it a day. A day, which when I actually think about it is like, so a day is complete. We're going to call it a day. It's complete.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I use it a lot, but I almost always say, let's call it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is different.
Feels very like film set to me. Okay, call it. Right? It feels very film set to me because I feel like that's where I hear that. It's like a shortened version of the idiom, right? Call it. Let's call it.
Let's call it.
Yeah.
Yes, perhaps not as antique, not as inherited, more of the current moment. Love it. So anytime you need to end something, you can use let's call it a day as a way of you taking initiative to say this is done, but making it feel perhaps a little bit like it's a consensus.
Yeah. Or if you want to ask, right? If you really want to leave, right? You really want to be done. Like, can we call it a day? Right? Like, rather than being like, are we done?
Yeah.
Because being like, are we done is maybe not going to be received as well. But like, hey, can we call it a day? Is usually taken in like, oh, sure.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe not always with a positive response, like, yes, you might get told no, but it's received very differently than a very direct kind of like statement.
Very good point. Yes, these idioms can be really useful, especially for those of you using English in your business, because every culture has slightly different mores, right? And one of the things that you might encounter in English-speaking business environments is that people are sensitive. Certain things are uncomfortable, like saying, are we done? the energy that says this meeting could have been an email.
Right. Right. So
idioms are a useful way to create just a little distance and sort of help you to navigate those moments of potential discomfort. The next one we have is under the weather.
Listen. I'm just a little under the weather. Can we call it a day? I'm just a little under the weather. Right? Can we be done? I don't feel well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Can we call it a day? I'm just a little under the weather. I don't know why I do that in a New York. Start to go into it like a New York City kind of. Did you hear it?
Yes,
Can we just
because
call
it's
it a day?
Because it's inherited.
Truly. But I tend to use this one a lot. Like talking about health and talking about like feeling unwell. Again, with so many of these, it's like because of, and this might be uniquely like United States, but because of our like health system, like it's awkward to talk like completely openly about like your personal health, even if it's like a cold or a flu kind of thing. You need a day off. You need to take a sick day. I would never be like, I'm throwing up, I'm taking a sick day. I would say, I'm just feeling a little under the weather today, and I'm going to need to use one of my days. Right?
Yes.
Because it doesn't divulge too much information about the actual state. So it doesn't make the other person feel uncomfortable. It doesn't also make them feel too bad for me, right?
Yes.
But it lets them clearly understand that I'm not well enough to work, and I'm not well enough to be in space with other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps there's something about invoking the sort of antiqueness or the inheritedness of it, that you're like saying I'm sick, but in a way that we've all agreed is socially acceptable.
Acceptable, yeah.
That carries its own baggage. So if I say, oh, I'm under the weather, they're like, oh,
Yeah.
so you're sick in like a professional capacity and you need to...
Yeah, right. I feel like if it were like a very serious illness, like if it were something that like were very serious, then we wouldn't use it. I feel like this expression also tends to be used for like milder illnesses that are like a day or two kind of thing that you can't go to work for, or you actually need to cancel events for, but not so serious that you like need to be hospitalized. Right? If I were going to be like hospitalized because I was so ill, I wouldn't use this because it implies something slightly milder, I think, right?
Yes. Very good clarification.
But if I say, oh, I'm ill or I'm sick, then you might start to go, oh, you might get overly concerned because you might think your brain goes to hospital, your brain goes to doctor, right? Mm. So it's a way to alleviate some concern by implying mildness of the illness.
The hoops we jump through.
Right. Like, why can't we just say it? I've got a cold. I'm not coming to work today.
Speaking of why can't we just say it, our next idiom is spill the beans.
Yes, and spill the beans is delicious. And also a little more old school. I feel like our generation, especially like Generation Z, Gen Z, would use like an updated version of this, which is like, come on, spill the tea or share the tea, right? But this tea is so good, right? And so it's about sharing information, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like the updated version, spill the tea or like share the tea, has a slight like hint of like gossip to it, or like deep truth that like, you know, is again uncomfortable that you wouldn't talk about in like a group meeting. But in a group of three, like, yeah, of course we're going to say what we actually think. And so spill the tea. Like, and also it's about one person like adding information onto what a small group knows, right? So if you and I were spilling the beans or sharing tea, I would be adding knowledge to something that we both knew about, but I would be deepening our understanding of it so we could come to a collective understanding and like start to conspire together about how to move forward, perhaps, right?
Yes, it has a conspiratorial air
it
to
really does.
And you know, it fills me with a certain amount of like comfort that even as this idiom evolves, it's still essentially the same act, right? Which is that you get together in a small group and you gossip over some shared food.
Right. It's like in Spanish we use the word chisme, right? It's really good chisme. And so like spilling the beans or sharing tea is all about passing on chisme. All about it. And it makes me want to do this. Like, I want to lean in and like, yes. I really want to get the good information, right?
Yes.
Like, let me just like also like offer you a single ear to make sure I really capture all of it, you know?
The energy is so correct, so on point. So you can spill the beans or you can spill the tea. But again, this probably is with someone you have a close enough relationship to gossip with. It doesn't have to be gossip, but you wouldn't ask perhaps your boss to spill the tea or spill the beans unless you have a relationship with them where you two can gossip about things.
Yeah.
Which you might.
I would not say to the dean in a meeting, oh, spill the beans, spill the beans, dean. Right?
Spill the beans.
Maybe that's the next update to this expression.
If you busted that out to your dean, I'd make you a little badge of honor. It was just swear around. Ultimate wordsmith.
I'm a real Shakespeare.
Shakespeare. Our final idiom of the day is
last but not least, to use an idiom.
By the skin of your teeth.
So this one is disgusting. I just want to
this is
let
yours.
you all know that I offered this one because it gives me a visceral reaction. Because again, of the image it inspires, right? Like, so just like listen to each word. By the skin of your teeth. Could you imagine your teeth being covered in skin, but still having to like use them, or like having like skin coverings for your teeth, and then your teeth like extend out to chew and then retract back in? It's horrible, and it's meant. I feel like it's designed to do that kind of like, because you did that by the skin of your teeth, right? It's like you just barely made it. It's like and again, like just pulled it off in a way that makes people around you go, right? And so it's that kind of like cold air on your teeth, like, kind of sensation in the people around you, like watching or like following along with what you're doing. Like you just barely got there. You just barely finished. You just barely completed whatever. And sometimes in a safe way, but sometimes there's also like, it also implies like perhaps like an edge of danger, right?
Yes, and again, it is a very sort of a colorful image to describe a feeling of discomfort.
Yeah, that
someone has in watching you, or that you had in achieving this. So, as we sort of wrap up our discussion on idioms, I think it's important that we come back to idioms are often taught in learning a language as sort of like, you gotta learn these. People are gonna use them and you're not gonna know what they are, but you gotta learn these. But predominantly in American English culture, when you employ them, you should also know why.
Yeah.
Why aren't you just using literal language? Why? What is the use? What is the added function of an idiom? And I think largely it's taking advantage of this sort of inherited idea. So when you use an idiom, you're using essentially slang that the community has approved.
Yes.
So
and like codified in some way and then continued to pass on. Yeah.
So know as a speaker that when you use an idiom, you're sort of quoting previous generations.
Which is like beautiful and delightful to me. It's a way to, keep ancestors alive. Truly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll end our live here, but we'll end our discussion of idioms here, and perhaps we'll just also put out there, our CEO, our Bold Voice CEO, Anada, shared with us her top 3 idioms. And we're just going to give them to you because we think they are that great. So we asked her for her most used, one that she employs the most. And she said, reinvent the wheel. Or because she's a CEO, she's often asking people not to reinvent the wheel. What if we worked from existing structures and we made them even better? What if we don't have to go back to the drawing board?
Start completely over. Go back to the drawing board, right?
And then we asked her what her favorite idiom was, and it's the pot calling the kettle black. It's just a great one.
Yes.
Would you like to explain what that one means?
I feel like it can come up often in like close relationships. My mom likes to use it a lot, actually, too. And so, because I'm one of several siblings, right? And so if like one of us is pointing out something that the other sibling did that was like atrocious, or like they need to get their act together, for example, she will go, "Oh, they need to get their act together? Well, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black?" Because she is implying that I too need to get my act together, and that both the pot and the kettle are painted the same color. And so the pot is also black. And it's not about the color or the paint of the pot. I think I actually just misspoke that. It's actually about the how long they've been used in cooking. And so the image is that like the pot is like judging the kettle for being dirty and like cooked and like used and like smoky. A little crusty, maybe smoky, right? But the pot is in the exact same condition. The pot is in the exact same condition. So it's so useful. I feel like especially parent-child or like older person to like younger people, if there's like bickering, because that's the context I've experienced it in the most.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I feel like also, I've also heard it sometimes like in a romantic relationship context, like you bring something up, it's like, oh, really? Well, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? Because the implication is like you do that all day long too. So let's both fix it. Let's both work on it. It's a that one has a lot of mileage.
It does.
To use an additional idiom, that one has a lot of mileage. I think one of the other like points I'll just throw out there is that like as you've witnessed in both of us, as we've gone through this, that sometimes idioms like just sneak into your like everyday language. And I'm not always conscious about how many idioms I'm dropping in. It's like I just used that phrase has a lot of mileage, meaning you can use it in a lot of different situations. That wasn't purposeful. It's just how I express something is very useful.
Yes.
Right.
I was
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no.
I'm always delightfully surprised by what types of idioms are kind of rampant. I know in American English, we use a lot of sports terminology as idiom. Yeah. We use a lot of driving and car related terminology, like a lot.
Do. Like a lot.
And perhaps this has to do with sports more kind of like, at its core. But I also noticed that there's a lot of sort of like violence that finds its way into action. So let's give it a shot. We're going to take a stab at something.
Shoot that email over to me, right? Like
let's pull the trigger on this.
Yeah, and those are interesting. And I actually know some people who purposefully try to avoid those. Just because like, can we just say I'm going to send you an email? Like, and this is a cultural thing because of where we are at in the United States with our gun violence and gun laws. And so a lot of people are trying to actually actively take those idioms away from their language so that it's not just part of like our subconscious, right? Yeah. Which is interesting.
Yeah. And I think I applaud any person who wants to take a deeper look at subconscious elements of their speech. And then do with those elements what they wish.
What you will.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Lovely. Well, that's all for today. We have we hope these idioms will be useful to you, and we challenge you to go out into the world and apply one of these in a situation where perhaps you would like to create a little bit of space between yourself and the circumstances. And take advantage of the voices of the speakers who came before you, the ancestors, sort of evoke their voices in your moment of expression.
And with that, we'll call it a day.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone. See you next time.